When we talked this week with former Vice President Cheney, we also asked him about his very serious health issues. As you'll see, our conversation turned surprisingly personal. You reveal in your book that last summer you were entering what you call end-stage heart failure and that doctors installed a pump in your heart. And you say in the book that you were unconscious for weeks. Why?
The surgery was done on an emergency basis. I'd reached the point where my livers and my kidney and so forth were shutting down because of a lack of blood flow. The heart had gotten so weak after 5 heart attacks that it simply wasn't able to move an adequate volume of blood to supply all of my vital organs. The solution for that was to install what's called a HeartMate 2. It's a pump that supplements the heart. We don't have artificial hearts yet, but this goes a long way towards restoring that basic flow. And I went through that surgery 9 hours one night, came out of it. You're on a respirator, heavily sedated. I contracted pneumonia. And so I spent about nearly 5 weeks in the ICU on respirators, heavily sedated, as a result of that. And
heavily sedated so they could deal with the pneumonia?
Well, with everything, with getting getting the pneumonia cleared up, getting me back to the point where I could breathe on my own, and begin the recovery process.
So you weren't in a coma. You basically were
deliberately sedated.
Yeah.
They wanted me sedated out of
it. I'm sure a lot of people are saying that. Absolutely.
Hooray, yeah, okay.
You're 70 years old. You've had 5 heart attacks.
Mm-hmm.
In your book, you say, I have some medical decisions to make in the future,
mm-hmm.
medical choices.
Right.
What choices?
Well, one of the questions is whether or not I want to go for a heart transplant. The equipment that I wear was originally put together as a transitional device to keep somebody going until they could get a transplant. Now it's gotten good enough that a lot of people live on it for years. I haven't made a decision what I'm going to do yet, but that's one of the options I'll have to look at down the road.
When you say it's a choice, if a transplant mm-hmm. would keep you alive longer, and if you're eligible for it, why wouldn't you have one?
Well, that's a subject I would discuss with my doctors, Chris, and then you'll be the first to know after I've weighed those options and decisions.
What do you hope? And I hope you lead a very long and mm-hmm. happy life, and I hope you fish a lot on the Snake River.
So do I.
What do you hope that people will remember, and not just about these last 8 years, but about your years, your decades of service to our nation, sir?
I feel especially good about what the President and I were able to do during the most recent administration with respect to keeping the nation safe in the face of the kind of hostility, obviously, that contributed to 9/11. We had 7.5 years where we kept all further mass casualty attacks against the United States away from us, kept the country safe and secure, and that was a major accomplishment. Nobody would have believed on 9/12 that that was a possibility. Beyond that, I was enormously blessed to have the opportunity to serve as much as I did. I came to town to stay 12 months over 40 years ago, and I got to do everything from serve as Chief of Staff to the President, Secretary of Defense, 10 years in Congress. It was a great career. I worked with some fantastic people. Got to spend a lot of time with the U.S. military, and that's as fine a group of people as you're going to meet any place. So I look back on that time. First of all, it went very fast, but secondly, as I say, I loved every minute of it.
Mr. Vice President, we want to thank you so much for talking with us, and I want to thank you for your service to our nation, sir.
Thank you, Chris.
And hello again on this Labor Day weekend from Fox News in Washington. In his no-holds-barred new book, former Vice President Cheney chronicles his remarkable 4 decades in public life. He takes us into key behind-the-scenes moments in the Bush White House, and he offers his opinion on where the country is headed now. We sat down with Cheney this week to talk about his book, In My Time, and about a lot more that isn't in the book. Mr. Vice President, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
It's good to be back, Chris.
I want to start in June of 2007. The Bush administration had intelligence that Syria was building a nuclear reactor with help from North Korea. There was a meeting of the National Security Council, and you made the argument that taking out the reactor would send a strong message not only to Syria, not only to North Korea, but also to Iran. What happened?
I lost the argument. I thought I made an eloquent presentation, Chris, but after I'd had the opportunity to have my say, and the president was very good about, he knew what I was going to say, but giving me that opportunity. Then he went around the room and he asked if anybody there, members of the National Security Council, agreed with the vice president. Nobody did. I was the only one who advocated that course of action. So the ultimate outcome was that they decided to pursue a diplomatic solution through the United Nations. The Israelis found that unacceptable from their perspective, and the Israelis took out the reactor, which was what needed to be done.
You also give a detailed account of Secretary of State Rice negotiating in 2008 with the North Koreans. And frankly, I think it's fair to say, you hammer her. You say she made concession after concession. This was an approach to arms control I had never seen before. We were headed for a train wreck.
That's correct. She had a lot of help from the State Department. Of course, Condi at that point was the Secretary of State. But I felt that the North Koreans continually walked away from commitments they'd made, and the tendency of the State Department was to make another concession to see if that wouldn't get them to fulfill their commitments and their obligations. They never did. Our failure to be consistent over time and to keep those commitments and to force them to keep their commitments, I think resulted in a situation where the North Koreans not only proliferated technology to Syria, ultimately they tested another weapon. They went forward and developed uranium enrichment capacity, which we thought they had. They denied it. Turned out they in fact have it. They've got some 2,000 centrifuges operating now. They basically function with impunity in a diplomatic sense. And we never did get on top of the North Korean problem during our time in office.
Now, Rice has now responded to your comments and says that you basically attacked her integrity and that she never misled the president.
Well, I don't believe that I attacked her integrity. I did try to make a strong case on the merits, on the substance of the issue.
I guess the point I want to get at is it wasn't just Condi Rice and it wasn't just a rogue State Department, because in October of 2008, you report the fact that President Bush agreed with Rice to take North Korea off the list of state sponsors of terrorism, and you write this in the book. It was a sad moment because it seemed to be a repudiation of the Bush doctrine and a reversal of so much of what we had accomplished in the area of non-proliferation in the first term. I mean, here was the administration, in your mind, going back on its own principle.
Well, and the president made the decision based on the advice he got. He obviously got conflicting advice from me and from Secretary Rice. It was his call. He's the President of the United States.
But why do you think he changed so much?
Well, I think he believed that that was the right thing to do. I disagreed.
But why do you think he believed it when clearly he didn't?
I can't, speak for him, obviously. But I think he sat down and looked at it, and he concluded he wanted to take Secretary Rice's advice, follow the lead of the State Department, which he did, and made that decision.
I wanted to start with these two examples because they seem to confirm a belief that you were marginalized in the second term, that after having an awful lot of clout and influence, not to say you ran things, but that you had a view of the world and the president seemed to agree with you, that kind of ended in the second term.
Well, I think perhaps my clout was diminished. That's possible. I wouldn't quarrel about that. I didn't measure my success in terms of what I recommended based upon how many debates I won with respect to policy. I did it based primarily upon what I believed, what I thought was best for the country, and with the encouragement of the president.
I guess what I'm getting at is that it seems to me is that the clear implication is that while you feel that you remained a hardliner in the second term on confronting terrorism and confronting the state sponsors of terrorism, that you believe the president and some of his other top advisors went soft.
Well, I didn't use those words.
I know,
Chris,
but
those are your words.
But isn't that what you believe?
I believe that we were not as effective in the second term dealing with this issue of nuclear nonproliferation as we had been during the first term, when we stripped Libya and Iraq and AQ Khan of the capacity to proliferate nuclear technology.
But why do you think the administration lost its will in that area?
Well, you're asking me to make a judgment now.
Well, you're as close as an observer as anybody else was.
And I've given it a lot of thought and written about it. So what you find in the book is what I believe. And in terms of trying to interpret why others did what they did, I can't be in that business. They've got to speak for themselves.
You write also about the Iraq troop surge in 2007. Mm-hmm. Republicans started to get nervous. It wasn't working as quickly and effectively as it had been hoped. Stories started coming out of the White House about maybe you're going to start pulling troops out faster. You go to see the president, and you say to him in the Oval Office, these stories, these leaks out of the White House are cutting our commanders off at their knees. Shortly thereafter, the National Security Advisor, Steve Hadley, comes to your office and says?
It said that he'd been the source of one of the leaks and that he'd done it at the direction of the president.
It's pretty stunning.
Well, it was a bit of a surprise. My immediate reaction was to think it was probably as well that I didn't know that before I'd made my pitch to the president, because I thought it was important that he hear that other point of view. Now, on behalf of the president, he made the right decision. He stayed with the surge all the way through. He was the one who originally opted for the surge. And when he was getting all this advice from Capitol Hill, because there were a number of Republican senators, frankly, that were talking about bolting, and from people inside his own staff, he looked at that, listened to it, ultimately decided to stick with the surge, and it was the right call to make.
I want to ask you about another issue. In your book, you say how upset you were when you found out that the latest, the final Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, told the Saudi king that President Bush would be impeached if he were to take out Iran's nuclear structure. But you don't say what your advice was. So I'm going to ask you a direct question. Did you advise the president to take out Iran's nuclear infrastructure?
I didn't write about that in the book.
I know.
That's why you're asking.
Yes.
Yeah, no, what I felt strongly about and spoke publicly about at the time was that I felt we needed to have the military option on the table. We never got to the point where I said I think we need to launch a strike against the Iranian program. But I did think it was very important that it be part of the package.
But you never
of
advised.
Possibilities. I was always advising keep that option on the table.
But you never advised exercise it.
Correct. And when Bob went to Saudi Arabia and said to the king of Saudi Arabia, the president can't do that or he'll be impeached, he in effect took it off the table, and I thought that was a mistake.
Let's go back to 9/11. What do you remember about that day?
What I remember that really stands out, like it was only yesterday, in effect, I don't think I'll ever forget it, was being in my office watching the second plane hit the tower in New York, and then having the door burst open and my lead Secret Service agent come in and grab me by the belt and the hand on my coat and say, "Sir, we have to leave immediately and take off." Run me down the hall. I had no choice but to go with him, the way he was maneuvering me. And he informed me as we took off that there was a plane headed for Crown, code word for the White House, at 500 miles an hour, coming in from Dulles. It turned out that was flight 77, American 77, that came in, made a circle, and went into the Pentagon. Then I was on my way to the Presidential Emergency Operations Center when we started the process, called the president, urged him not to come back until we knew better what was going on. But foremost in my mind is sitting in the PIOC, after
which is the
Presidential Emergency Operations Center.
The bunker underneath the White House.
The bunker underneath the White House. Had Norm Mineta with me, the Secretary of Transportation. We had a list of 6 aircraft we believed had been hijacked instead of 4. We were trying to get all the planes down out of the sky, and we watched as the towers of the World Trade Center collapsed, something nobody had really expected or anticipated. And you could sit there and see and be very much aware that thousands of people were at that moment being killed as a result of these terrorist attacks that had struck the United States.
Now, you and the president had earlier discussed rules of engagement for taking down a hijacked airplane, but you were the one who gave the direct order to shoot down a plane that you were told, as it turns out incorrectly, was headed for Washington.
Right. That's correct.
What's that moment like?
Well, it was necessary, and it was frankly, I didn't pause to think about it very much, because once one of those aircraft was hijacked, it was a weapon. We'd seen already by that time 3 of them go in to the Pentagon and the World Trade Center in New York. As a result, thousands died, and if we had been in a position to intercept one of those to keep it from striking its target, would we have done it? Absolutely. And what I did was pass on the President's approval of the basic proposition that we would, in fact, authorize our people to shoot down aircraft that had been hijacked and refuse to divert. So I saw it as part of my responsibility, but I did it quickly because we had a lot of other things we were doing at the same time.
There's been a lot of talk about your criticism in the book of Colin Powell. You say that he seemed to feel it was okay to talk to outsiders about his problems with the president's Iraq policy, but that he never brought it up specifically in meetings with the president. As you know, Secretary Powell, General Powell, has unloaded on you. Let's watch.
It's going to cause heads to explode. That's quite a visual. And in fact, the kind of headline I would expect to come out of a gossip columnist, Mr. Cheney has had a long and distinguished career, and I hope in his book that's what he will focus on, not these cheap shots that he's taking at me and other members of the administration who served to the best of our ability for President Bush.
You have the classic Cheney half smile. But in fairness to the general, he says, look, I'm the guy who said to President Bush, the Pottery Barn rule, you go into Iraq, you own it.
Well, I think if you look at the book, Chris, and I know you've read it, the fact of the matter is there's a lot more in the book that talks about the positive relationship I had with General Powell when we were both at the Pentagon. And I had selected him to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We worked very well together for those 4 years through Operation Desert Storm and so forth. So I think, I don't think General Powell had read the whole book when he made his comments.
You're pretty tough on him in the book.
Well, I was accurate and historically, I think, portrayed what I perceived to be the situation. I assumed I'm only going to have one opportunity to write a book. Now, the President's written a book, Secretary of Defense has written a book, Director of the CIA has written a book, Secretary of State's writing a book. I thought it only proper that I should put down my thoughts on those years in office, which is what I've done.
But when he says that these are cheap shots and you're wrong,
well, obviously I disagree with him.
Anything you want to take back?
No.
Powell's former chief of staff, Lawrence Wilkerson, I don't know if you know this, has also weighed in. He says that you're worried about being tried as a war criminal.
Well, that's news to me. I don't pay a lot of attention to Mr. Wilkerson. I don't know him. As far as I know, I've never met the gentleman. I know he speaks out from time to time, and that strikes me as a cheap shot.
Your head's not going to explode.
No.
Okay.
No.
Almost 3 years into his term, what do you think of Barack Obama as president?
I disagree with him on a great many issues. I supported John McCain. I did not support Barack Obama when it was time to make that choice in 2008. I think he has been not very effective, frankly, especially in the economic arena. I think we're faced with terrible economic problems today. Huge long-term debt problem that's gotten measurably worse on his watch. Serious unemployment problem, millions of Americans out of work. And in spite of a lot of bold talk, we haven't seen the kind of action that's required in order to get the economy moving again, to restore growth and hope and prosperity that all of us depend upon.
Obama is making a speech to Congress, to the nation next Thursday, a new plan to turn around the economy. Right. Based on what you've heard, based on what he's done, what are your thoughts?
Well, I haven't seen what's going to be in the new plan yet.
Supposedly infrastructure, extending payroll tax cuts, more of the same.
Sounds like it. I don't think it'll get the job done. I think we need a very, very serious effort, primarily through tax policy, to provide incentives and encouragement for people to save and invest and to expand their businesses and to create more jobs. The kind of thing we did in the early Reagan years, 30 years ago. I think that's essential. I think we need to significantly reduce the regulatory burden on the private sector. The Obama administration is doing exactly the opposite. They're loading on more and more regulation on the private sector with respect to the how the economy functions. We need to have a pro-growth policy put in place that offers people hope and offers the opportunity for businesses to expand and for them to have confidence in what the world's going to look like over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years with respect to domestic economic policy. Right now, they don't have it. And it's not clear to me that the speech that President Obama is going to give this week will provide it. I hope it does, but I remain to be convinced.
Do you think Hillary Clinton would have been a better president than Barack Obama?
Boy, I'm not sure I would have ever said that. Perhaps she might have been easier for some of us who are critics of the president to work with, but you know, she.
Why do you say that?
Well, just the sense. I have the sense that she's one of the more competent members of the current administration, and it would be interesting to speculate about how she might perform were she to be president.
Do you think the Democrats would be better off in 2012 with Hillary Clinton as the nominee?
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to discourage a good primary contest on their side, but I don't want to be in a position where I'm endorsing Hillary Clinton. That might be the kiss of death for her. Fact is, I'll be supporting the Republican nominee, and I think we've got some good candidates that are going to mount effective campaigns against the Obama administration. I don't have any reason to believe Hillary Clinton's interested in running, but maybe she is.
You wouldn't discourage it?
No, certainly not. I think it would be good for the two-party system.
Last year, speaking of Republicans, last year you endorsed Kay Bailey Hutchison for governor of Texas against the incumbent governor, Rick Perry, who'd been serving in that role for 10 years. And you said this: Westerners know the difference between a talker and the real deal. If Rick Perry wasn't right to be governor of Texas, why should he be president?
Well, I haven't endorsed anybody for president yet. I supported Kay Bailey Hutchison. We'd been friends for a long time. I'd known Kay since we worked in the Ford administration together many years ago. And when she decided to run for governor, she asked me to support her, and I did. It wasn't any commentary on Governor Perry. It was.
But you clearly thought she was a better candidate than Perry.
That's correct. And she ran in the primary, and she lost.
But why did you think that Perry was not as good a candidate as she was?
Well, I didn't know him the way that I'd worked with and knew Kay Bailey.
Not going to get anything on you on that.
Well, I'm trying to avoid that.
There's a lot of talk that you and the Bushes really like Mitt Romney.
I do like Mitt. I think he's a very able guy. Watched what he did with the Olympics in Utah, the Winter Olympics. And I thought he was a good governor. Again, though, I haven't endorsed him, haven't endorsed anybody else. Don't expect I will anytime soon. We'll see what develops in the primaries and who emerges from that process. I do expect, in the end, I'll support the Republican nominee for president.
Do you worry at all that Obama is vulnerable, very vulnerable, some would say, but that the Republicans, with this push from the Tea Party, may end up nominating somebody who will have difficulty moving back to the center in the general election and winning independent votes?
That's not quite the way I think, Chris. My belief is that I think the Tea Party folks have had a significant positive effect. I think they have, in fact, sort of put on the national agenda in no uncertain terms this whole question of our deficit and debt problems. I think members of Congress are paying a lot of attention, as they should. And I would expect that they will continue to have a role to play, and that they represent a very significant body of opinion out across the country that badly wants the government to get its act together with respect to spending. I think that's a plus.
One last area I want to get into with you. Back when you were President Ford's chief of staff in the 70s, you were kind of a press favorite. You used to pal around with the press, and now I think it's fair to say you're seen by the mainstream media as suspicious, even hostile towards them. Has your opinion of the media, of the mainstream media, changed over the years, and if so, why?
I don't think it's changed so much. I've had different roles. When I was White House Chief of Staff, I spent a lot of time with the press on a background basis. Rarely ever got quoted, but I was in a position to be able to help explain administration policy to my friends in the press corps. As Vice President, I wasn't. And that was a conscious decision. I made a decision some time ago. I wasn't going to run for president myself. I wasn't going to worry about what people in Iowa might say about my conduct as vice president. It's also true that I was a staunch advocate of some very controversial policies, like the terror surveillance program and enhanced interrogation techniques, out of a deep conviction on my part that we badly needed those to succeed in the war on terror. I'm proud of those policies, but I couldn't talk about those either. And so the net result is I think the press felt maybe neglected by me, but it wasn't because I didn't care for the press. It's just that I had to be more discreet than I'd been before.
But I want to just press this. I don't know if you've seen this. I was watching your interview on the Today Show earlier this week, and I don't even know if you're aware of this. I want to show you. Take a look at how it ended.
Thanks for being with us this morning. I appreciate it.
Well, Matt, I've enjoyed it. Thanks, investigate Cheney.
What do you make of that? I mean, I somehow doubt that if Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama were speaking, they would have taken the shot, and then suddenly a person with a sign would have been putting their picture up. I mean, simply, do you think there is a liberal bias in the mainstream media?
Oh, I think there probably is, but I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. I think those of us right-thinking conservatives find that there are a lot of outlets out there now, on the media, on the internet, that give us an ample opportunity for our points of view to get across and to be heard. And it's kind of situation that, with respect to my own circumstance, there are a lot of people out there who don't like me, don't like what I did in public life, disagree fundamentally with my views. It's okay. It's a democracy. I don't need, or I didn't need, 100% to prevail. I only needed 50% plus one. And I'm not running for anything now. My political career is ended. I loved it, loved every minute of it, but I'm not trying to impress anybody with what a great candidate I'd make, because I don't plan to be a candidate.
Later in the program, we'll have more with the vice president, some surprising revelations about his health, the big decision he'll have to make, and how he hopes his countrymen will remember him.